If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Welcome to episode 4. In this episode, we will be interviewing Jane and Scot Noel of Dreamforge Magazine. Hey, Diane, how are things going?
Hey, Alan, it's going really well. How are you doing?
Good. Super excited to get this episode going. We've just been busting through these last couple episodes super fast, and I love it.
I know, right? I've been looking forward to this one in particular, so this is cool.
Awesome. Anything significant going on with you right now?
Well, I've, for the past, couple of months now, I've been disappearing down my own navel on World Anvil, I'm trying to get the creators of it on the show. It's a world building utility for writers, gamers, and whoever else might be interested in doing that. They just had somebody say that they're going to present their scholarly research on the site so it can be used for a variety of purposes. And I've been looking for something like this whole life. It's just so cool. I'm creating my Weird West and Toy Soldier Saga universes there. It's like a combination series, Bible, and wiki for your universe, and you can make it private or public, and I've just been having a great time. The community's awesome, and I can't wait to talk about it in a future episode.
Awesome. That sounds really weird and interesting. I'm not sure if I've ever heard anything quite like that.
I think it's unique. I don't think there's anything else out there like it. You definitely check it out if you're in these fields, because it's really cool. And pay the money, right? Because the special features really are worth it, and they're so cool, it's a steal. But, yeah, what's going on in your life, Alan?
Not much. I'm taking a little break from reading a lot of fiction, because 95% of my reading is fiction, right? And I decided to read some nonfiction for a change, but it's like a mix between political stuff, which, God, why am I banging my head off of that wall? I don't know. But I am for some reason. And I'm also reading up on one of my favorite bands, Tool. I don't know if anyone out there's probably people scoffing at me right now, but I do love Tool, and I just got a biography of their lead singer, which I used to be a huge reader of music nonfiction, but I've really tapered off in the last 10 years. So I'm kind of diving back into that pool just for a little bit to kind of take a break.
No, it's cool that you're getting back into that. I love biography. I think it's really interesting. I read a fair bit of that as kind of a guilty pleasure myself, so that's pretty awesome. And as for the political stuff, well, hey, I watch a lot of political shows, and for me, it's about trying to make sense of the chaos. So that's why I'm banging my head against the wall, so I can relate. And, I think we kind of have to, if we're going to be full participants in a democracy, kind of at least be aware of how the system works so that we can exercise our democratic rights effectively, right? So that's why I do it.
Absolutely. You're right, and I will remind myself that every time I throw the book across the room cursing.
Oh, I know, right? Oh, there's so much out there that just makes me so mad. So, don't hurt yourself on that one. I mean it.
Yeah, totally. All right, so here we go. Let's why don't we start the interview here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, sounds good. Hi, everybody, and here today we have the folks behind Dreamforge Magazine, Scot and Jane Noel. Thanks so much for coming out, guys.
Hey, sure. Hi, yeah, we're glad to be on.
And I am here with one of my co-hosts, Diane.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. It's a nice snowy day in March here in BC.
And it's pretty cold here in Pittsburgh, too. And yes, crappy weather. You can never know when the snow is going to stop. It keeps saying...
Yeah, the sun, that's a change.
It is. And we've actually had sun for a couple days, which has been nice.
Yeah.
And weird for Pittsburgh.
Yes.
So before we go too far, I want to do I'm going to do bios for Scot and Jane. Scot is a writer, having bluffed his way into computer games with a second place win in Bridge Publications' Writers of the Future contest of Volume 6. Jane is an artist and designer whose work as art director assured the success of early Dungeons & Dragons computer game titles like Menzo Berranzin. Is that how you pronounce that? Menzo
Berenson.
Close enough.
Nice.
Menzo Berenson, Alan. To ask the gaming nerd. Menzo Berenson. That's what it's called.
Got it. And Ravenloft, which I think everybody knows Ravenloft, Stone Prophet, along with award-winning original titles like Anvil of Dawn. And that was back when they were game designers. Both Jane and Scot also worked on Chronomaster, an adventure game title designed by Roger Zelazny and Jane Linsgold. Upon leaving gaming, Jane and Scot worked together to found a web development and digital marketing agency known today as Chroma Marketing Essentials. With CME set to celebrate its 20th year in the spring of 2019, they have decided their younger partners are better stewards of their beloved company's future and moved on to the next adventure, which is called Dreamforge Magazine. And Dreamforge has been out for about a year now, right?
That's correct. We had our first year in 2019, and now issue 5 is our first issue in 2020, and it's coming out like right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I mean, like, how do you feel now that it's been out a year? What's changed?
We now know how much work it is.
Yup.
We have had absolutely no background in publishing print materials at all. So this literally was a brand new adventure for us in learning from square one. We really had no particular driving desire to get into print or publication, other than the fact that, you know, we had more of a philosophical thing with so much dystopia going around. And I personally felt like it's time for good old science fiction that looks at the future as a hopeful place. You know, the human adventure is just beginning kind of slant on things. So those are kind of the origins of Dreamforge. But what has changed, we know more now what we're doing. We know how much work it is. In fact, this year we've scaled back from quarterly to 3 issues because 4 issues nearly killed us last year.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Other than that, we think we have got essentially the makings of a high quality product in both print and conceptually and the quality of the stories.
Digitally.
Yeah.
We have a digital magazine too, so we want to be able to do more with the digital portal and more interviews with authors and illustrators and more of the behind the scenes of making the magazine. And some of those are things that we're hoping to do on the digital side of stuff that we don't really have room for in the print, but it's a way of drawing people in, you know, to the community more, so that we can really truly build a community of people that you know, kind of feel the same way about the dystopia that's out there and the idea that they want something different.
That leads into so many of the things that we wanted to talk about.
It really does.
Awesome. I'd like to say, first of all, before I start all that, Jane, it's awesome that you worked on Menzo Berenson. I loved that game so much. It was great. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, that was a while ago, because I remember that was when we were doing very early 3D stuff.
Yeah.
That was some of the first true 3D rendering that we did on Pentium's 95s, and you would have to set them to render for the whole weekend so that they could come back and you'd have 30 seconds of video. So that was crazy fun times to be doing games.
I totally believe it. At the time, it was groundbreaking. Everyone, including me, was just awed by what you guys had done. And now, of course, it wouldn't hold up to a Flash game, you know?
No. You have to do more on your phone now than that happens.
That is a fact right there, yeah. Yeah, okay, so Alan and I were going to talk to you about, what inspired you, like, what do you mean by positive speculative fiction, and what made you decide to focus on that in particular? And you were talking about, was it all the fact that there seems to be all this dystopia out there?
Yes, I've been a big fan of science fiction. I was reading Analog in high school. And it just got to the point where, like in 2017, more and more of the stories I was reading were really dystopian about how the world's falling apart, how evil people are. I would describe a story, but I don't want to, get into that and have an author mad at me. There was one particular story that just was so, the main character, you got the impression that at the end their last resort was basically to go forth into the wilderness and die, kind of thing. And I just got to the point where I was telling Jane, it's like, this is kind of ridiculous, because we see the future in a completely different way. And I think there's a large topic we can talk about as far as perspective of people, because I think I understand kind of why people think things are so dystopian and why they're not seeing what's really happening.
Okay, that's cool. I don't know about Alan, but I'd sure love to hear you open up a bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask the same thing.
Okay. Well, for me, my thought is basically that this is actually the best time in human history so far. And I've always been puzzled as to why we're not seeing that, or why some people have trouble seeing that. And for me, I see the future as one of convergence of technologies, abundance of resources, and it can be one of empathy, and it can be one of justice. Why is that? That people don't see that as what's happening now. And I think part of it is just biological. It's humans biologically. We have sensory and mental limitations. For instance, if I said that, it wouldn't come as a surprise to anyone if I said our sense of sight is limited and we really don't see all the colors, in the spectrum, and that our sense of smell can only handle so many scents, and that there are other animals that see better than us, and obviously dogs smell things at a far more sensitive range than we do. Well, taking that as a concept, our minds also have limitations. They were built to handle a much earlier world, and they really focus on bad news and threats. The way our brains work hasn't significantly changed in like 200,000 years. And that's because back then, when the grass moved, you better jump, because it could be a wind or it could be the lion. Mm-hmm. And today, our World Wide Web brings news of, the grass moving everywhere all at once around the world, and it just scares us to death. And it overwhelms us and leads us to feel like everything bad is happening. And our brains are really geared to focus on that rather than anything else, or to the preference of anything. And we also suffer from judgment creep. And it's a second factor that just piles on to that concept. And what I mean by judgment creep is when we solve a problem, we see the limitations of the solution far more clearly and intensely than we see the benefits of the solution. And we have a tendency to continually raise our threshold for success as we make progress. And I think if you take a step back from everything you see happening today, and you say, hey, we're a 200,000-year-old species, and what's the history of that species? Well, almost 250,000 years, and we just invented civilization like 11,000 years ago. When did things really start to take off to create the world we kind of have today? And that goes back about 500 years. And then if you get to around 300 years of where the Enlightenment, started to happen, and you really got into reason and empiricism and numbers and medicine and all that kind of thing, that really started to take off. If you were graphing it, you'd see this really steep rise in the curve where it's almost starting to go asymptotic, that sort of thing. And to the fact where we're not, the rate of change is not only increasing at a great pace, the rate of change itself is accelerating. And all the technologies we have are starting to converge and link together and allow us to create things that were inconceivable before. Mm-hmm. And that's happening in medicine and technology and computing, in biology, in almost every field, in space exploration, in almost every field. And our ability to harness energy, even talking about renewable sources of energy, is also accelerating at a great rate. And so, the future I see is one of abundance and converging technologies and very bright, which isn't to say there aren't going to be problems. I'm not talking there's going to be a Pollyannish, utopia. There are always going to be problems for us to overcome. But I think we're biologically not suited to see how well things are going. We're biologically suited to see all the problems that are communicated to us.
That sounds totally sensible. I agree with so much of that. I think that it's often difficult to see the forest for the trees. You're right. Humanity in general has a better quality of life than we ever had in the history of this planet. Some people
even the people in the most poverty now are living better than what wealthy people lived a few hundred years ago.
Absolutely, right? And but we see this huge inequality going on in our society, and this is what we find so frustrating. But the truth is, yeah, we're actually doing better as a species than we ever have in terms of our general happiness and quality of life and resources. I think part of the problem is the old system, which is based on that, as you said, 200,000-year-old, 500,000-year-old scarcity mindset and, being aware of threats. Right, we have to find a new way to look at a bigger sphere at a time than our monkey sphere to expand those resources. It's all there. It can be done. We have all the technology. We have all the resources available, but we're still limping along on this old system that isn't working anymore. And as anyone is at the end of an age and the dawn of a new one, it feels like the whole world is coming apart. And the stakes are so high, right?
The stress of what we're going through right now is also part of the issue. Humans aren't geared to accept and deal with change that's happening as fast as it's happening right now. And that also adds enormously to the stress. But there's so much good that's going on now. I always just pull out a few things, but extreme poverty worldwide is decreasing, and that's according to the World Economic Forum. That the share of people living in extreme poverty across the world has been declining for the last 2 centuries, and in the last 20 years, this has been faster than ever before. And part of that is the child mortality rate in both the less and least developed countries has been cut in half in the last 20 years. And by any measurement, those are extremely positive human, advancements.
Yeah. But the thing is those are species to see in those advancements, and I think what you're saying, Diane, too, is that there are winners and losers in the short term when change happens. Because, if you look back 100 years, those people that made wagon wheels, they were out of work pretty quickly. And if they didn't change and adapt to start making cart wheels, then they kind of lost a lot. And it's the same kind of idea, is that new technologies mean there are new opportunities, but that doesn't mean that the people who were getting by in the old technologies, they didn't, there's always that stress that's going to happen in a smaller scale when you're not talking about the benefits of the entire species.
Truth.
And Diane, you had touched on the idea of inequality, vast inequality, and I think that's true, but also, I look at it in terms of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I have all my needs met, if I have, a home that I feel is a decent home and a good home, and I have, the food that I need, and I'm able to make a living, and I'm able to do things that like make a magazine or, something that's artistic and that sort of thing, there's a point at which I don't really care if there's some guy who owns Mars.
That's true.
That might be vastly unequal in terms of wealth. And I might be somewhat disgruntled that maybe he has a better shot at immortality than I do, that kind of thing. But there's a point where, if I'm satisfied, that's okay. And also a point where if you've established a system where a rising tide kind of lifts all boats kind of thing, that I'm not going to be so worried about the vast inequality. Certainly, I think we're going to have a revolution if that vast inequality is, well, that guy owns Mars and we're all here starving and we don't have our basic needs met. Or there's a class of people who actually get literally immortality and super health benefits and the rest of us don't. Those kinds of things are going to cause significant, global or military uprising kind of situations. But in general, we need to think in terms of not who's got the biggest piece of pie, but how many pies are we baking? And I think we have the ability to reach out into the solar system and the universe and make more pie. That kind of idea.
Right.
Fair enough. No, I see where you're coming from. Yep.
So I feel like with your magazine, what you're trying to do then is you're trying to visualize those good benefits that a lot of people, unintentionally ignore.
In part, what we're trying to do with the magazine, like as far as getting this message across, like that I'm trying to get across today, I use my editorial for that. So I have my own little soapbox, and I can point out pieces of these kinds of things in the editorial. And then when I look for stories, I try not to look for specifically message stories too much. That it's here's a message story. This is why Scott picked this one.
Right.
I do. There are some in there, but not all of them. But what I do look for are stories that are more about kind of empathy, triumph of the human spirit, people cooperating to do things. I love it if I see a story where it's not a main character hero who's solving a problem, but rather either a couple people or a community that are solving a problem. I love that sort of thing. I like stories that show, essentially that idea of humans reciprocating with one another to solve the problem or solve their own interpersonal problems. So I look for stories that have more of an emotional impact, more than just message stories. And issue 5 that's coming out, here as we're in 2020, I often gear them to themes, and this particular one is called On the Edge of Hope, and like what I was trying to do with that was make everybody cry. So I dare anyone to get through that magazine with dry eyes.
Awesome.
Because we've read some of those, and maybe we're wimps, but we've read some of those stories like 7 times as we've been proofing and all that stuff, and they still make us cry. So that was that one. Issue 6 in the middle of the year will be more fun and just kind of almost going back to that computer game D&D kind of thing. It's like, hey, these are just fun stories.
Yeah.
But we try to do that. We try to make each issue a little different, have a little bit of a different theme or approach, and so that they're not always coming at you with exactly the same thing. Except for my editorials, I'm always going to be positive and bullish on the future in my editorials.
But the idea is that people connect the stories, and it's more the outlook that you can get people to think and feel. Almost like in the Star Trek kind of way, is the stories have a positive feel to them, and that's really the idea of it. It's we want to be inclusive, we want to have variety. We have some stories that are funny, some that are sad, some that are like tense and more action driven. So we're not trying to say that everybody has to be all happy in the stories. If that's not a good story, but it's still that idea of there's a positive feeling when you're done reading it, as opposed to, the world's going to hell in a handbasket kind of situation.
Right. So that brings up 2 questions for me, one for Scott and one for Jane. Scott, you're talking about your role as an editor to some degree here. Can you tell us about some editors that have influenced you?
The editor that would have influenced me the most is Algis Budrys. He ran a magazine in the 90s called Tomorrow Science Fiction, and he was also our instructor at Writers of the Future. When I won that, and we went out and had essentially they give you like a week-long class in writing and doing things. And he selected one of my stories for his magazine, and he's kind of my inspiration. And I just, it's one of those things. It's kind of like when you're growing up and you say, can I do this or can I not do this? You always have a role model where you can go back to and say, well, my dad could do this, so I can do it. And for me, as far as editorial kind of things, Algis was kind of that person in where I can look back at the things he taught us and working with him as I read his magazine and sold him a story and that sort of thing. It's like, I can do this. So.
Nice.
Awesome. And Jane, I was going to ask you, what are your influences coming from the art side of things?
Not a lot of the traditional science fiction magazines, because not many of them considered art to be as important as what I wanted it to be. Basically when he said we want to do print, I'm like, well, it's got to be full color. I don't even want to do it if we're doing black and white.
Awesome.
Kind of idea. 2 magazines, well, 3, I guess, if you want to go back to date myself here, Omni, way back when. Realms of Fantasy is another one that I kind of pulled up as a model of, that magazine just looked beautiful. And Blackgate was another one that I really liked. Even though that one was black and white, I still liked it a lot. I really enjoyed the stories in that one, but there was still an illustration of some sort, even if it was a black and white. But I would say probably of those, Omni's kind of dated right now, but Realms of Fantasy would probably be one that I would say is a kind of an inspiration.
I loved Omni. Omni was awesome. I'll date myself too. I don't care. I literally discovered Joan D. Vinge because they had one of the picture of the Summer Queen on the cover, the same art piece on the cover of Omni, and I recognized it when I saw it in the store, and I'm like, oh, what's this? So, good discoveries there. And they had great stories. It was cool.
They did have great stories, and what I found, I was in art school at the time, and this was way pre-internet, and one of the things you did as an artist was you built resources. So I was forever clipping National Geographics and other magazines where it was, you would kind of sort and file your pictures to say, you had people doing this position or that position, or, so that when you were doing an illustration and you needed a reference, that was your internet, was your box of filing stuff.
Yep.
So wasn't that long ago, I found some of my box of filing stuff, and I had saved a tremendous number of stories and illustrations from Omni from 1980, 2, 3, something like that, maybe 83, 84, when I was in art school. And I pulled them out, and I'm like, and it was like Connie Willis and George R.R. Martin, and what was another one I found? Joe Hollerman, maybe, something like that. I mean, names that are big names now that in the 80s were probably not such big names, but these are the kinds of stories that were in Omni. So it was pretty cool, and then they all had a really gorgeous illustration with them. So yeah, I thought that was pretty fun pulling that out and looking through some of that stuff, because I totally forgotten I even had it.
That's cool. That's cool. Wasn't Ellen Datlow the editor for Omni for a while?
Yes, I remember.
Okay, I thought so. Do you feel like your focus on the art in the magazine adds to your theme at all?
I feel like, well, I'm a visual person, so yeah, of course. I feel like it helps people connect in a way that just text doesn't. Because I think to a large extent many people are visual, and I know from Scott and I'm way more visual than he is, because he makes the pictures come in his head, and he probably has his own little movie that plays when he reads a story. But to me, the images are really important in helping people to connect in the character and the feeling of it. And I think, some of the illustrators that we've had and the quality of the work and the comments we've gotten back from people, like we were talking to somebody the other day about the cover that was on issue 4. That's the astronaut that's underwater and being saved by the other astronaut, and it's just the intensity of the expression, the striking colors. It definitely made an impression, and that's pretty important. I think the cover on issue 5 is Chaz Kemp did it's for the Terrors of the Caribbean, and it's the dinosaur and the pirate, and that's a pretty winning combination as far as the dynamic.
Absolutely. Sorry, no, I'm just visualizing dinosaur and pirate. I haven't even seen this yet, and I'm like, yeah, I would totally pick up anything that had that on the cover. I don't care.
When that story came in, he was pretty excited about it. I'm like, yeah, I know you're gonna buy it. It's got pirates. It's got dinosaurs.
I remember, Scott, we were at a reading in December, I believe, and you were talking about it then.
Yes. Well, we did finally do that. It's actually a bit of, it ended up being a bit of a long piece because I requested edits to it. The original one actually was not quite as helpful as I would have liked.
Right.
And so we got some edits, but it turned out to be a longer piece, so it ended up being a 2-parter. So part 1 is in issue 5, part 2 will conclude in issue 6.
Okay, interesting. I know I personally love the art, especially the cover art on a lot of them. Number 3 is my favorite so far, partially because I also know Scott Hallam, the author whose story was used for the art. But I do just love that cover, and I have to tell you a funny little story. My youngest child absolutely hated the cover of the second magazine. It scared him, like the troll thing. So I would be reading it, right? So I'd be reading it, and I would read a story, and I'd set it down and walk away and do whatever life stuff. And I'd come back, and it would be like flipped over, or he would throw it behind the couch a lot. So I'd always find it thrown behind the couch.
It's not even a scary troll. On cover 3, I love that story too. And that particular artist was somebody I'd been following on Instagram. And when I read the story, I couldn't get that artist's work out of my mind.
Yeah.
That's who we have to get to do this, because there's like the way that she works, it's like very, everything's got this neon kind of glow to it. And she does some beautiful, beautiful work. And I just like, I had to approach somebody I didn't even know on Instagram to say, I really want your illustration for this story. And it worked out really well.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a stunningly beautiful magazine, and that is a really cool thing. I think that your choice to, emphasize that, you wanted it in color, you didn't want it in black and white, that reflects sort of the world that your writers are creating too, right? It's colorful. There's light and there's interesting things to look at. And I think that's amazing. And I'm really glad that you guys are finding success with that model, since so many people are cutting that out in order to save printing costs, right? It's fantastic.
Oh, well, we understand that financial.
I'm sure you do.
The financial pressures and why this is so hard. And again, we've come at this with absolutely no publishing experience, so we're learning how difficult it is to basically find your audience, pay the bills, all that sort of thing. So it's interesting for us. It's still an experiment, and we're in our second year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying, like, we try to give the illustrators a lot of freedom in the work that they're doing for us, because they come back with tremendous ideas, and we're not getting a reaction from illustrators saying, I'm not going to bother to read that, just tell me what you want. Those aren't the kind of illustrators we're working with. We give them the story with portions of it highlighted that really pull out the descriptive natures or a good scene or something like that, and then they come back with, how about something like this? And then, we may give a tweak or two, or we might say, yeah, that looks incredible. So they get a lot of input in it. Some of them even give me some title design work. Mostly I do the title designs, but one of my goals is to make sure every story reflects a look and feel that's appropriate to the story, so that if you come into the story in the middle of it, you're still going to have a sense of which story you're in without seeing the title page necessarily. Like, I don't want every story to have the same white background or the same any single color background. I want every story to have its own feeling.
That's awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, you all know that I'm a supporter of Dreamforge Magazine. You might wonder why you should support Dreamforge too. First, understand that Dreamforge is a new kind of science fiction and fantasy magazine that is looking for hopeful futures in a time when it seems hard to find that. Second, check out their magazine. The illustrations are beautiful. Personally, I was very impressed by the cover of the 3rd issue. Additionally, they have top-tier talent writing in the magazine, like Jane Linskold, Dave Weber, and Mary Soon Lee. They also have new authors to discover too. And if you're like me and read a lot on the bus, they have a portal set up for you, so you can read the magazine on your phone or tablet. There are plenty of other reasons to check them out too. You can find them at dreamforgemagazine.com. That's DreamforgeMagazine.com.
Well, I think another thing to bring into it, and kind of touching on what Diane was saying about the magazine being in color, and that just the fact that it's in color and has interesting visual appeal kind of reflects the hopeful nature of what we're doing. Another thing that reflects that is the community that is kind of contributing to it, even in terms of the writers, because in our first year we printed stories from Argentina, Canada, Denmark, Greece, Italy, South Africa, and the UK, besides the US. And as we start 2020, we've got a poem from India, short stories from the UK and the Netherlands. So we've started to appeal to a worldwide kind of broad spectrum of people who can write about and share kind of the same concepts, and that has a lot of appeal to me as well. And when we do our readings, when we're going to open up for submissions here soon. We've recruited what we call first-line readers. We don't call them slush readers because our experience is that we don't get slush. We get a bunch of, often very nicely crafted and certainly well-meaning stories, from around the world. So we call it first-line reading, and we've recruited a group of those people from around the world. So we have first-line readers in Germany and Australia and New Zealand and India that help us read these stories and bring forth. And I always hesitate to say the best stories because we don't always even agree what the best stories are.
Sure.
What they are is basically the first-line readers bring forth the things that they really love, and then it's my job to try to craft a magazine out of that. And oftentimes when we're, quote, sending a story back, we're basically just, hey, we don't have the room, or it just doesn't fit the theme, or I got 1,000 stories and I can only print like 12 this issue, so I have to have 12.
Right.
But that doesn't mean your story was bad. It's not being sent back to you because you did a bad job.
I have to say that oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jane. Yeah.
No,
You're good.
Okay, well, that leads me into two things, right? One is that I wanted to tell the story, right? You have given me the most positive rejection letter I think anybody in history ever received. And I think that it's really cool because, I was trying to get you to serialize one of my longer stories, and you read it, and you said, this is really awesome, but we just can't afford to do serializing right now. We're still too new, right? But I went out and bought your book. So that awesome, that I couldn't have asked for better. So that's really cool. So just for writers out there, these guys are great, right? Even the rejection letters are all very positive, and you make it clear from personal experience that it's not about, oh, your story's junk or whatever. It's about, based on what we're doing here in the limited space that we have, this just isn't going to fit this time. Please try again, right? So thank you for that. As a writer, I really appreciate it, right? The second thing is that you guys are talking about building your community. And this is something that I wanted to focus on because my focus on the podcast here is the greater community around the speculative fiction community and how we can build positive community between us. So tell me a bit more about that. What are you guys doing to build community? What are you looking for? And how are you maintaining that, especially in an environment where the internet can often be a very toxic place?
And as soon as we're able to answer you, very good answer as soon as we figure all that stuff out. Those are very good questions. And I think we're very much like publishing because, again, no publishing experience whatsoever. So we had to start from scratch and just kind of stumble and skin our knee and get back up and try. I think building a community would follow along the very same lines because it's certainly something that we want to do, and then real life happens and our real jobs snow us under, and then it's late in the night and we're trying to just get, it's just like, let's find the typos in the magazine. It's like there's no thought of how do we build the community. So the community is building, slowly and just kind of through the things that we need to do, like reaching out to the first line readers, and then they reach out to their friends, and we've seen a lot of community building from our contributors as well, and we've had some amazing buy-in from people like Jane Lindskold, who's our senior advisor. We've known her since the computer gaming days with the Chronomaster that we made with Roger Zelazny, and she basically just volunteered and signed on and said, I love what your concept is here. I'll be glad to try to help you. And then she's trying to teach us about just the etiquette of working with writers and working, publishers and that sort of thing. And illustrators like Elizabeth Leggett, who's a Hugo Award-winning illustrator, that we've now used in almost every issue, and she's reaching out to friends and people and trying to bring them in and make them aware of us. And as we did our Kickstarter here, she donated a portfolio. She recently did a Ray Bradbury themed art portfolio that was actually even at an art exhibit, and she has these for sale. And she basically donated one of them to us so that we could, sell it and make money, support the magazine.
Oh, nice.
And
wow, that's so cool.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, we've had several donations. Jane Lindskold donated her time to review someone's novel manuscript. We had a sculptor. His studio is like Retech, retech.org online. He does these amazing sculptures. Some of them are very dark and dystopian, but he also does a fantastic steampunk sculpted lamp sort of thing. So he donated one of those to us to sell. And these things are worth hundreds of dollars to basically support our Kickstarter.
And it's just what the kind of help we get from people in general, like the authors. Serena Ulibarri is one that's been really, Emily Ma helped us promote our Kickstarter through some stuff that she was doing on Blackgate. And just so many of the authors, Deborah Davitt, that did the Terrors of the Caribbean, she was out there promoting us on Facebook and Twitter to her followers. So we have a lot of our authors that are really helping us, which is wonderful. And then our first line reader people are fantastic. So those are some of the communities that have developed. But we're working then to get, we want to get more people involved with maybe a Facebook group and get some discussions going and share some of the positives. Because there is, the internet can be a very toxic place, but it can also be a really, I'm consistently impressed with the amount of information that people share freely in a more positive way. I mean, I guess I stay away from the toxic stuff on the internet too. I just don't go there. I don't do politics. I won't go there. And I don't do negative. But there's an awful lot of people that share information in all kinds of ways that really benefit other people, and it's there's good out there too.
And not even talking necessarily in the science fiction community, because we're in the technical community and we make websites, we do software, we do digital marketing. It's like almost any problem we have in our industry, it's fairly easy to go online and find somebody who says, oh yeah, I ran into that problem with that email system too. Here's how you solve it. I ran into that problem with that plugin for that website too. Here's how I solved it. And it's extremely rare to not be able to find well-meaning, free, advice that helps you through a problem when you're on the internet. People just don't talk about that. It's like, they ignore that and focus on, again, the negative, the
negative comments,
the negative comments and the trolling.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I really wanted to bring up that you're kind of reminding me is I've been amazed by the number of people who are essentially dystopian in nature or have really kind of moved down that dystopian dark path, who have gravitated toward Dreamforge and kind of joined our community. And they kind of live in both worlds, supporting us. And then, one good example in issue 5 is there's a young engineering student in India. His name's Aditya Deshmukh, and he's one of our first line readers. And he's also a writer. And when you go to his website, it's like he classifies himself as a lover of darkness and the void. And all of his stuff is very dark and dystopian, and the world's going to end. So what he thought to do for us, and it's a poem that we bought and published in issue 5, he wrote this poem, which you read it, from top to bottom, and it basically is like a declarative statement that we've destroyed the earth, we've destroyed ourselves, and there's no hope for the future whatsoever. And he's done this in a way that if you flip the poem upside down and read the lines in the reverse order, they make exactly the reverse statement.
Huh.
Which I thought was an amazing accomplishment from someone who may not even be, a native English speaker,
Right.
That was an amazing thing for him to do. And also the sculptor I was just talking about, retech.org, where he makes these very kind of dark, his sculptures, a lot of them look like little baby doll heads on mechanical pieces, maybe with spider legs.
I've seen those.
He makes, things that look very, very, they're statements, I think, on transhumanism and commentaries on what it is to be human in a modern world, and they're often very dark. But again, you've got this person saying, literally, I will give you a lamp to put on your Kickstarter to help you succeed. And how more metaphorical can you be? Here, I will give you light.
Yeah. Huh.
From this person who is so dark and thinking, here's my vision of the world. It's pretty dark. But you guys over there, you seem to think something's hopeful. Instead of making fun of you, I will give you light. Here, go take this.
So I have one anecdote to share in regards to Jane and Scott in the way that they treat the community too, and that is that They did the art for If This Goes On. Yeah, I mean they did the little art thing. Plus they put us our ads in the magazine, which was awesome.
And thank you so much for that. It looks beautiful, by the way. I just love it.
Thank you.
And let me add, they also helped us come up with the name. So they are tied in deep with us. And, I mean, from everything I've seen, that's how you all treat everybody. And that's fantastic, I think.
I noticed that you guys...
You can't talk about good and hope in the world and not treat people well. I mean, that's... And because I like a lot of, Scott feedback for the authors. It's like, this is not a bad story. There aren't... Some of them are not publishable pieces. Some of them need a lot of work. They're not something that's professionally written. But a large majority of them are. And he's like, these people are putting this in here with all great hopes, and it's their masterpiece, it's their work, it's their baby. You don't want to just cut them down on it, It's like, and if it is something that's really good, it's just we can't take it. You just tell them it's really good. We just can't. We just bought a story like that, or it doesn't fit our theme, or whatever. But it's a perfectly valid story. And there have been even different times where we're like, this story would be really good for this magazine, and we kind of point them to somebody else that it might be a good fit for.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we are running low on time, but I've got two last questions I would like to ask before we do our book recommendations and you tell us about future projects. One is that I noticed the link to, and I don't know how to pronounce this, it's either Kiva or Kiva microfunds on your site. Can you talk about that?
I say Kiva. I'm never sure whether I'm pronouncing those things very well. Kiva is a microfunding site where you can go on and you join others in supporting entrepreneurs around the world. And by entrepreneurs, we're talking about maybe a mother in Malaysia who needs to buy more feeds so she can get more milk from her cows to sell that, or someone who's creating a well, or a student who's going to college. But you have the opportunity to look all over the world and find something that speaks to you. And the smallest donation, like the standard donation, is $25. And it's not really a donation, it's a loan, because they're going to pay this back. And you join a number of other people, up to hundreds of other people, giving thousands of dollars to help this entrepreneur buy the things they need to succeed to help their community, and then they pay the loan back, and then that loan comes back to you. You could take the money back out, but you can also then say, hey, I've got my loan money back, and you can loan it to another entrepreneur. So we've been doing that for a number of years, and I think it's just a really cool thing.
I love the idea of microfunding. I think that this is one of the things that is just going to make the world better in general in the future. So good for you guys. That's great.
Yeah, I went and saw that, and I immediately thought, I think, my family could probably help out with this a little bit too. So I'll probably be doing that soon in the future.
Oh, cool.
So last question, and then we can do our book recs and talk about your future projects. Last question. We ask this of everybody who comes on the podcast, except for the one time that I forgot to do it. Say that under my breath there. But what brings you hope in this time?
Okay. Well, I'm going to kind of quote from one of my favorite, as far as I read a number of people who look at the future and see a brighter future. One of them is Steven Pinker, and he has a number of books out. One's called Enlightenment Now. He's a cognitive psychologist, a linguist, and a popular science author. And he has this. He says, what is progress? Most people agree that life is better than death. Health is better than sickness. Sustenance is better than hunger. Abundance is better than poverty. And all these things can be measured. If they have increased over time, that is progress. And I think if any of us spends just a little bit of time, even on the distrusted internet, or looking through public records, or whatever you want to do, there's a vast amount of evidence that, over the last couple of centuries, every one of those measurements has increased dramatically. And people just aren't seeing it because of the way people are. We're human.
Totally fair. Right. Yeah, that's cool.
I'd say for me, what gives me hope is just the goodness in people. Because you don't see it when you look at news, you don't see it when you look at politics, and there's an awful lot of the internet where you don't see it, but there's a lot of places where you do see it. And it's just stories. Like there's one here that's local. I don't know if you would have seen it, Alan, or not, but there was a furniture company around here that was owned by a family for 98 years, and it was a good company. One of my friends works there, actually. It's a very good company, and the guy recently retired. He was in his 70s. He retired. He sold the company. 2 years later, the company that bought it was going to declare bankruptcy, and 1,200 people would have been out of work. And instead of letting that happen, this guy went and bought the company back and saved 1,200 jobs. He's taking it over again.
Beautiful.
And it's like, that's really an amazing thing.
It really is.
Yeah. So there's good in people.
I agree.
I love that. All right. Well, thanks so much for those awesome stories. So let's talk about what you're doing next, and then we'll do some book recs.
Well, we're trying. What we're in the midst of right now is just getting our fulfillment together for our Kickstarter and to get issue 5 out there, and then we'll be on to doing issue 6, and after that issue 7. So we're going to be doing that.
We have about half the stories picked out for issue 6 right now, so we still have to do a reading period to get some more for that. And then it is going to be it's the digital and trying to get some of those other things we're talking about happening too. So
yeah, that's great. I got to tell you, I tried for years to get a community around my old podcast going, and I did not have the energy to do it. So God help you.
It's energy and support. And some of what I think is going to make it possible for us is like some of our first line readers. Specifically, we should mention Jamie Monroe is our editorial assistant. And he's been, he was our #1 Patreon fan before he even knew who we were. And the idea that we could find somebody, as Scott said, that sometimes understands the concept of the magazine better than we do, to find somebody halfway around the world that gets it and wants to be part of it is a really cool thing. And, people like Jamie will be able to help us to do more.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Point us in the direction of some websites that we should look at. Your Kickstarter, your main website, give people some URLs here so they can look you up.
The Kickstarter has concluded, so I would send people to our main website, which is just dreamforgemagazine.com. And if they want to subscribe, it's just dreamforgemagazine.com/subscribe. And our print this year is $29.99, which gets you the three issues we're going to release this year. Or you can get an online access for $14.99 for the year. We're going to look this year at possibly selling some merch. We tried to do some T-shirts with the Kickstarter, and we're essentially gaining experience in what it's like to actually do something like that. But that would be it. Take a look at Dreamforge. We have, once you sign up, you actually get into a reader's portal where you have your own login and dashboard and access to different levels of things. So
awesome.
So before we completely wrap up, what's everybody reading, and any good suggestions? Can we start with Scott and Jane?
Sure. I'm currently reading The Future of Humanity by Michio Kaku. He's an American theoretical physicist. And, he also has that same kind of look at things that we're talking about. And, his whole thing is we should try to leave the world a better place than when we entered it. And he believes that as individuals, that's our responsibility. And I think, just personally, a lot of times people look too much to government, celebrities, politicians. It's like, I don't want to swear, but screw that. It's just go out there and make a difference. Help people. Do good in the world.
And just about to start the N.K. Jemisin trilogy because somebody sent that to me and I haven't gotten it started yet. I've been reading my book club book.
Broken Earth?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And the other thing that I'm halfway through is I found it online someplace and decided I had to have it. It was authors that were influenced by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Nice.
And it has some really great stories in it of the way that Tolkien's work influenced their work and their lives. And I thought I was just really, really enjoying that. And there was a particularly good one in there. I think it was Michael Swanwick was the one that I really liked, that he was talking about reading it to his kid.
Yeah.
Did some really good stuff. And I love Tolkien. He's one of my things there. I love him.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. That sounds great.
So what are you guys reading?
Oh, Diane, do you want to go next, or you want me to go next?
No, that's great. Okay, I'm currently working my way through the big book of science fiction. I've been reading the SF Masterworks imprint, and my goal has been to do a book a month, right? And I think it's been, so it's going to take me like 10 years to do it all, but literally, I'm not kidding. But it's really giving me a grounding of the roots of science fiction, and it focuses on a lot of that, sort of golden age positivity kind of element, and not always, golden age science fiction often gets a lot of criticism for being sexist and racist, which it can be, but there's really great stuff by women and marginalized writers, and it's awesome, right? And the big book of science fiction is just like that, only it's for short stories, and I'm getting a really broad perspective of things that I've read other writers refer to and have never had the opportunity to read myself, and I think it's awesome. And another thing I'd like to recommend, I was thinking about my focus on the podcast as far as reading is I'd like to highlight some of the indie speculative fiction community, because a lot of people don't read indie writers. And I would like to encourage you to do more of that, but there's so much out there, it's hard to know where to start. So I'm going to recommend today The Withered King by Ricardo Victoria. It's a science fantasy book. Reading it is kind of like reading your way through a combination of Final Fantasy and a Dungeons and Dragons adventure. So be aware, physics don't work like they're, supposed to in the real world, and I don't care, right? And I think it's really awesome, and it's very much in this vein of radical hope. And he's an awesome writer. He's from Mexico. I published a story of his in my limited adventure into publishing so far, which was a single anthology. So I hear your pain, right? And yeah, he's great. Check out his work.
Awesome. And I've got a couple here. The first is The Guardian by JD Moyer. That was published 2019 by Flame Tree Press. This is the second book in his Reclaimed Earth series. And I reviewed the first one back in Alan and Jeremy versus Science Fiction, and I can't even remember what episode. But if you go back and look, it's there somewhere. Anyway, the idea is that 100 years ago, a supervolcano exploded and destroyed a lot of civilization, and part of humanity escaped by creating these ring stations in space, and the other part of humanity just kind of stayed and waited it out and kind of saw what happened, right? And those that stayed, I don't know, like all kinds of funky stuff happened to them. Some of them like mutated, they regressed back to kind of the Middle Ages kind of technology. And this novel picks up about 10 years after the events of the first novel. It's got a great juxtaposition of fantasy and sci-fi, which is what I absolutely loved about the first novel. And in this one, he kind of moves a little more into hard SF territory, kind of explaining what has happened. But the fantasy aspects still kind of remain there. I'm always interested to hear how he's going to explain some of the fantasy stuff, like very monsterish kind of stuff and characters. And then some of the characters have these powers, It's always interesting to see how he hashes that out. And I gotta say, even though I love the first one, I actually like the second one better. I think his writing skills have advanced quite a bit since his first novel. And I felt like the ride through the book itself was a lot smoother than the first one. So definitely go and check that one out. And then the second thing I want to mention is Ninth Step Station by Malka Older, Curtis C. Chen, Jacqueline Koyanagi, and Fran Wilde, which is published by Serial Box. And if nobody knows, they serialize their stories or their novels. This one is about a police station in Tokyo, Japan, in the year 2033. And the main characters are a Japanese cop and an American, what they're calling a peacekeeper, that has been assigned as the cop's partner in an attempt at diplomacy. Because, there's all kinds of different wars going on at this point, and Japan has been partly occupied by China. Anyway, it comes off as kind of somewhere between near future and cyberpunk, something like current William Gibson kind of stuff. It's also part political thriller and part buddy cop show.
This totally sounds like my jam, actually.
Yeah.
It's really cool. I actually got really thrown off at first with it because and now this is probably my third or fourth cereal box production. They call them productions that I've read. And this one is a lot more like a TV show, where the other ones were more like they took a chapter out of a novel, right? This one is way more like a TV show. And at first, in each episode, they kind of have like a different mystery to solve. But during the episode, you're also like learning background details that kind of add up to a conclusion, right? It was great. It was great. I was a little thrown off at first, like what the hell's going on? They like barely mentioned the other thing, and then it just adds up and really worked out well. And I've actually become a huge fan of Malka Older through this and through her Twitter feed, actually, because of this story. She was the, I don't know what they call her. She was like the lead writer on it. And it's just really great. I definitely suggest everyone go out there. Complex political thriller, near future sci-fi. If you're in any of that kind of stuff, check it out. And that's it, I guess, for this episode. Jane, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. We've been talking for a long time about having you on a podcast, so I'm glad that we were finally able to make that happen.
Yes,
Thanks
thank you.
Thanks for having us. We really enjoyed it.
Make sure to check them out at dreamforgemagazine.com. And thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
You too.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
All right, and that was our conversation with Scott and Jane Noel. Diane, how did you feel about that?
You know, I loved them immediately. I'm so glad that you asked them to be on the show. I was very excited when you said that you were going to have them on, and I totally feel where they're coming from, and I really respect what they're trying to do.
Yeah, me too. I mean, when I first met them, I was actually at a very small con in Pittsburgh, and I was about a year into my old podcast, and I ran into them in a panel, and then we came out and we talked about some things, and we just hit it off right away. And I talked to them for like an hour, just standing right outside of the panel. It was just really weird, and we exchanged stuff, and they gave me like their demo magazine, and I told them some local people they may want to contact, or some other people they might want to get a hold of, and stuff like that. And that's kind of how our relationship built up. And you know, I wasn't sure how their project was going to work out at first. And I had not really heard much about Hope Punk or Solar Punk at that point in time. And I hadn't really gotten into that stuff so much. And, you know, that was probably 2017. And I was still reeling from the elections in 2016 and understanding what was happening there, you know. So it was a weird time. It was good to meet them.
I think everybody can totally relate to that being, you know, like it took me a while to recover from that too. I was very excited when I heard about Dreamforge Magazine. Obviously, I've approached them as a writer. They have yet to publish one of my stories, but I've only sent them a couple, so you know, it's not, it's not the end of the world there. And like I said, they're very gentle, so that's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I was immediately, when I heard about the concept, I'm like, yes, this is what we need right now, you know? So I really want people to check it out. I would really like to see them succeed, and succeed spectacularly.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I feel like their magazine has come a long way since the first issue. And I gotta be honest, I've read 1, 2, and 3 at this point. But I think between 1 and 3, I mean, they just have found their focus and they know where they're headed. And I think things are really coming together for them. I have 4 sitting on my shelf. And at the time we're recording this, 5 is not out yet. I wanted to ask you, is there anything from that conversation that really jumped out to you?
I agree with their perspective that it's often hard to see all the good things going on when there's so much that seems bad and it's so complex. Right. And like they said, right, we are designed to focus on things that might be perceived as threats. Confirmation bias often gives us a perspective. And I think sometimes in life, it really is just a matter. Like, I'm not talking about if you're in any, real existential crisis, that, of course, that doesn't apply. And I'm not one of these people who says that if you just think positive, everything will be fine. I heard that a lot when I was working in the New Age community, and I think it's an excuse for elitist nonsense. But there is a point, right, where it really is a matter of choosing to look at the glass as half empty or half full. Right. And a lot of times there really are good things that are happening, even in the darkest times, that should give you hope. And if you were thinking about those things, you would have a more positive outlook.
Yeah, I totally agree. I gotta say, for me, I really liked your conversation about how they were helping the community and how they feel it's important to treat writers positively when they're responding and that sort of thing, because I think that's something a lot of people miss, is that you don't necessarily need these giant acts of kindness. Like, you don't need to necessarily donate $1 million to something. I mean, that's great, and if anybody can afford to do that, I definitely think you should give all your money to like Flint, Michigan or something like that, right? But most of us can't do that, and I think it's a great thing to be able to act positively, because there's so many people that are nasty or just unthinking in their interactions. Whereas if you just are a little bit nicer, it makes a huge difference to people, and it makes their day better. And believe me, everybody has shitty days.
It's true. I think that with my brief excursion into publishing, right, gave me a real appreciation, and I will do it again, right? But it gave me an appreciation for the pressure that editors are under. It's so frustrating when you're a writer and you just keep submitting and nothing, right? And everyone says, "Oh, we really love your stuff. Please try again." And you're like, "Why should I? I've sent you 15 stories. You haven't published any of them," right? So, but the truth is, there are less professional level magazines now than there have been in the past. Competition for those places are difficult. As an editor, you have to consider not only, you have to consider whether you like the story, and often it really is a matter of personal, like, I just jived with this one better. It's not really a matter of this is a better story. There are a lot of great writers out there. Even my little project was overwhelmed with the amount of submissions. So there's that, right? And then there's also, you've got to consider, what are you trying to accomplish with what it is that you're producing? And then you also have to keep in mind that you're not going to do any of your writers any good unless the magazine sells or the book sells. So you have to consider those aspects. So you're more likely to take a writer that people have heard of over one that people haven't, simply because you know it will sell the book, right? And trying to balance all of that, especially when you really want to give a chance to new writers, which I think most people in the industry do, right? It's so hard to do all that. So you got to be gentle. I tried to be gentle, and I'm glad that they are too. And I think it's so beautiful. And I noticed they come on our show, right? And they don't talk about themselves, did they? They didn't talk about themselves much at all. They talked about other people and their contributions. And that's a great way of doing things, because that builds a sense of we're all in this together, and we are.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, and I hadn't even noticed that. That's a fantastic point. So, all right, guys. Well, let's wrap this thing up here. First, I want to say thanks to Scott and Jane again one last time, and thanks to everybody out there for listening. You can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, or really anywhere that you get podcasts.
Absolutely. By the time that this airs, our Patreon should be up and running, because we're working on it pretty avidly right now. So what's the address for that there, Alan?
Okay, so I believe it is patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. So you should be able to find us there.
Brilliant.
Yep, and then of course we'll have, by the time this pod comes out, we're going to have different levels with some different stuff, which we haven't quite figured out yet, but there will be, and it'll all be cool. Trust us on that one.
We've been talking about the things that we can individually contribute for different levels and to our different patrons, and, I'm sure by this time there will also be a Discord community that will be synced with that, because I'll maintain that if nobody else does, because I love Discord. So, lots of things. Check it out. It'll be cool. Also, once again, dreamforgemagazine.com to check out the work of our guests.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey with production by Rachel Renee. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower, additional music by Christopher Snydrowski and Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. Special thanks to our guests, Jane and Scott Noel. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.
Letting